Dr. Grampy say yesterday that if a child is hyperlexic, she's very excited to work with them because it's a place, look, what's reinforcing to them is letters and numbers. And so if we can teach that kiddo to read and understand what they're reading, whoo, right? There are other kids where, and we'll talk with Lois about, you know, when that isn't already in place, the desire to learn numbers, the flexibility of understanding letters and numbers, it can be a much harder, long slog. But when that is already in place, that the thing that's reinforcing to them is letters and numbers, you can get a lot done quickly. Let's say that. And so you can't just let it go by the wayside. You gotta feed in all cases. But you don't want to miss an opportunity if somebody is hyperlexic, because it will turn around and smack you in the tushy. And we don't want to be smacked in the tushy, do we? Okay, I hope our guest is already here with us. Let me tell you a little bit about Lois. Her book, her new book, her memoir is, it's called Reversed. And in the reverse, some of the letters are reversed, which I thought was very clever. She has a son that, she has 3 sons, but one of them she describes as being autistic. When he failed his first grade, the teachers described him as withdrawn, lost in space, and even said, the worst child ever. Those people should be smacked, I'm telling you. School testing suggested learning would be very limited, revealing he could read only 10 words, displayed no strengths whatsoever, and a low IQ. All that just makes me so mad I want to throw something. How about you? But Lois was not deterred. She was not giving up on her child. She tried many different teaching methods that did not work. And she thought that they were no better than his first grade teacher. And that's when she was given the invaluable advice, make learning fun. Do we talk about that here on the show, or do we talk about that here on the show? This directive changed the lives of both Lois and her son. She went on to become a reading specialist, teaching children labeled dyslexic, autistic, or learning disabled. Now, Nicholas, her son, defied his label, woohoo, graduated in the top 20% of his high school class, receiving 2 undergraduate degrees in mathematics and mechanical engineering before graduating with a PhD, get this, in applied mathematics from Oxford University and a master's in health economics from Glasgow University. So look at that. What a handsome young man. Kind of amazing, but a mom who said, I don't think that these people are doing it right, and said, I'm going to figure it out for myself, and now helps other people to figure it out as well, and other students to figure it out. So let's welcome Lois to Autism Live. Lois, hello.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, and listen to
Can
that.
you hear me?
I was wondering what kind of an accent you were going to have, because some of the book takes place in Australia, some of it takes place in England, and some takes place in Texas. So I was like, it's going to be interesting, whatever she sounds like.
My story blows me away
Yeah.
because, you know, when children fail as badly as my son failed, the chances of getting out of that basket are really few and far between.
Yeah.
And here we are, the most privileged people on the planet. And it took a level of privilege that is way beyond normal for my son to go from the bottom to the top. And that is still scary for me today.
Yeah. But you are a testament to any mom who would not give up. I mean, you detail in the book, and by the way, the book is called Reversed, and you guys can get it at all major booksellers now. You detail in the book the time that you took, that you sat with him one-on-one, uh, you know, and would not give up. And
Yeah.
you learned along the way. I also think it's very cathartic for anybody reading this book to hear all the things that Lois went through. You got to read it. I don't want to give too much away. You got to read it. But also, you found yourself questioning, realizing that you struggled in school as well. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
You're right. It took me till I was 39 to realize, and I'm reading a book on dyslexia, and they have a list of 20 attributes of being dyslexic, and I have 17 of the 20. And it was the first time I thought maybe I have a problem. maybe it's not that I'm just dumb, which is the way you grow up thinking, well, I'm just not very smart. But what was obvious to me as a child was that I could read words and I couldn't comprehend. And that's demoralizing because you're working so hard to get through a book only to come out with a stick figure.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's one point in the book that it really struck me that you were remembering a circumstance that you had gone through with a teacher. And I'm going to misquote you here, but you said, my son is never going to feel the way I felt in that moment when the teacher, it was like, my son's not going to go through what I went through. And you're kind of amazing, all the things that you've done. But now tell us a little bit about, because I want people to read the book to see how you learned what to do and what you learned to do with your son so that he went on to have a PhD from Oxford. Hello. Um, that's like, oh, what a slouch, Lois. Like, he's just not doing
Yeah,
enough. Like, that's, I mean, pretty amazing, let's be honest.
yeah.
But now, tell them what you do now, Lois.
I tutor students who have generally fallen behind in literacy, and I talk a lot about how we teach children rather than about dyslexia. So that's what I do now.
Amazing, amazing stuff. And let's talk about that a little bit because I think we don't talk enough about reading comprehension. And one of the things that you're brilliant about is talking about the difference between a concrete understanding and an abstract understanding of something. So talk about both of those things and how some of these kids are looking at it differently and what you do to help them.
I'll tell you the story from the book because it still hits me today. My son was with a reading teacher, and the reading teacher was giving him sight words. And the sight word was the word saw, S-A-W. And she gave this boy 2 sentences to learn the word saw. The first was, I saw a cat climb up a tree. And the second was, I saw a man rob a bank. My little boy's 7. And he takes this piece of paper out and he reads it and he goes, I saw a cat, and he stopped. And he went back to the sentence and he shook his head and he said, I was a cat. He said, and then I had a cat and I assed a cat. And then he just handed me the paper. He totally ignored the second sentence altogether. It took me a while to work out what was happening. And the first was that the teacher has only provided this boy who has significant language disabilities with the abstract meaning of the word saw. The child read, I saw a cat, and what's he doing? He took the concrete meaning. He's cutting the cat in half. So he's totally confused about what's going on in this world of literacy. Because what does he do? He goes back and reads it again because he knows you do not cut the cat in half.
Amazing, right?
So, yeah, meaning based. And now, in addition to this, the part that really got me upset, our family had just spent 6 months in another country. We'd spent 6 months in UK. Every weekend or every day, we were seeing something new. And what is the teacher talking about? An experience the child has never had. In Brisbane, Australia, where we lived at the time, do you see cats on trees? The answer is no, you don't, because cats are an introduced species and they kill the local wildlife. And even in the 1990s, they were advocating keep cats indoors. What do you see in Brisbane, Australia? You see thousands of birds, you see bats, you see lizards, you see possums. Where are cats? So what's happened is the teacher has provided an example that is so confusing to the child that he's lost. And the teacher, instead of saying, maybe I've got a problem here, would have went back and said, well, see, the child's not learning because he's not very smart.
Right.
And the paper that drives me is one written by Professor Brian Campbell, published in 1990, that says beyond the deficit theory that when children fail to learn to read, it's because of an inadequate demonstration. What my son was given was an inadequate demonstration on how the written language works. And that word saw is just the start of the minefield our children have with language. Take a word like block. And I do a lesson with my students, and I have a block of wood, and I have put a block of wood inside a shoebox, and shoebox that's got a hole in it. And the next thing I ask them to do is read and comprehend the sentence, block the hole in the box with a sock, because there's a sock in there. And I watch what my children do, because the word is the same, the meaning is different.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, after I've done a lot of things, I have my students read the sentence, block the doorway. And if you've ever seen students totally confused because there's a block in front of them, and they look at the doorway and they think, what do I do? Block the doorway. And they look backwards and forwards. And I just keep repeating, block the doorway, because I know they know what it means. But the brain has got to switch from the concrete object in front of them to that abstract meaning. So all the time, I'm teaching my students to read and comprehend, to read and to think. And if that doesn't make sense, what else do I have to do as the reader? So your terminology, hyperlexic, was fantastic. I read about hyperlexic students when I became a reading specialist. And they're actually quite difficult to teach, children who are hyperlexic. But I do it the same way as I do dyslexic students. I have these concrete objects in front of them, and I ask them to do things with them, to read and comprehend. Not just to read, but read and comprehend.
Amazing. I found myself wondering as I was reading your book, because it felt like you kept coming back to he's got to experience it. Like there has to be an experience that's happening along with, and there was a part of me that, your background before you had kids was you were teaching physical education, and I was thinking maybe it took a brain that is used to something that is totally experiential to see that aspect of it. That a dear friend of ours that is no longer with us, Joanne Lara, was a dancer, and she started working with individuals on the spectrum and said clearly, something isn't crossing over the brain, and if we do things that cross the midline, and then she was years ahead of the research that showed that if we do things that cross the midline, it helps the brain comprehend things. So I just was struck by that, because that, your background was something, and I thought, oh, maybe it took somebody who was coming from a different point of view to see that. Absolutely love it. But the other thing that I'm really struck by, and it's in your bio, and you talk about it in the book, that learning has to be fun. And I feel like a lot of people just seem to have forgotten that, or never knew it, or failed to learn it. So if you would talk a little bit about, because some of the things that you're asking these kids to do are hard. And it's hard for them personally, and you're asking them to overcome something. So how do you get them to want to put in the effort? How do you make it fun?
I use books. I use a lot of humor, because a lot of times students don't see the humor. So they're reading words without understanding that humor's involved. So that's the first part. Use humor. The second thing I do is I give my students a real reason for doing something. So I turn a book into a play, so that they're just not reading words, but they're reading it and acting it out. And when you're doing that, we've got this real purpose for doing it. It brings in, have I done enough? Am I happy with the performance I've got, or do I want to read it again? And then finally, I use the iPhone, this thing, record the student doing it, so that they can send it on to parents and grandparents, so that they are proud of what they are doing.
Yeah.
But everything I do is comprehension based, so
Amazing.
that my students are not just reading words. And I think you're right. It goes back to me growing up reading words and recognizing there was a significant problem that I had that no one picked up on. So I'm always looking and thinking about what happened to me. Why could I do this and not comprehend? And one of the reasons was these words with multiple meaning,
Yeah.
and that we have to teach children to do that search for meaning right from the moment they start with early literacy.
I thought it was so fascinating in the book because again and again, it's like you are putting together these pieces to a puzzle, but there's, it's you've been told by the first grade teacher that your child is impossible, which I don't know how you didn't smack her into the middle of next week. That would have made me so mad. But then you take him to the swimming pool and you have this instructor who looks at it differently and says, okay, what do I need to do to help this student? And he's quite ingenious. And you notice how your child attends to him and is like focused because the teacher is investing the time in him. And I keep patting my hand because I love when a teacher is a good teacher and is solving the problem of how do I teach this individual. And I love that this swim instructor couldn't figure out, but then said, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put an X on your hand, and every time you need to breathe, every time you see the X, I want you to pull your head up and breathe, and suddenly he gets it. It was that easy. And I loved that as a
Yes.
mom, you were like, okay, what is the difference between this and what he's getting at school? And you weren't satisfied with just letting them figure it out. You stayed involved figuring it out. But I also want to talk to you, Lois, about the fact that a lot of parents, once their kids are in school, they get, and I was guilty of this too, it's like you just want to have them achieve academically, right? That becomes the be all end all. Well, can we get the B? Can we get the A? But there's so much more at stake here, right? Talk to us about what are the other things that we should be concerned about.
I think early on, we have to be concerned that our children are not being traumatized by the being in school itself. And it took me a long time to realize that Nicholas was actually traumatized in first grade. So that's the first thing. That we want children to be able to be a part of the school experience and not alienated. And how I wish above everything that my son had been given more social skills. In fact, both my middle and my younger son are on the autism spectrum, and neither were given the skills that they needed to set them up for life. One is doing okay, and the other one has more struggles. Does that give you some clues?
Well, I guess I want to tread carefully because I don't know how much you want to say, but I want to
Yes.
say I guess I have so many questions, but I don't want to necessarily ask because I don't want to trot upon things. Let me go to something that somebody has asked here. We had a couple of questions that came in. One person says, I'm dyslexic and my son is hyperlexic, but we both have comprehension issues. What would you recommend for this mom?
Oh, look, just let me turn around and reach for a book. Now, this shows the complexity of language. Pick up a book. This is one of my favorites. I think it's now out of print, but it's Ask, Ed, Stalk by Gerald Rose. And I'll show you where comprehension happens. And it's got 3 words on this page. Ask, Ed, Stalk, I will eat this egg. He pecked at it, but it would not break. And the next page is hippopotamus rolled on it. And the next page is lion bit it. And then chimp hit it. And the story goes on and on and on and on. Very simple story because you've got a big elephant stamped on it. I did this with my students. I got to the end of the book and I said to my students, and tell me, what's the it?
Mm.
And my students sat in front of me with this book and said, it is nothing. Why can't students comprehend? Because we have been taught that the word it is nothing, when in fact, it is a really complex word and it does have meaning, and skilled readers know exactly what to do. Those who struggle don't know what to do. So what do? Is I read this book and then I rewrite it. Ah, said Stork, I will eat this egg. Who's the I? It's also why you act it out. I is the stork. He pecked at what? He pecked at the egg, but the egg will not break. I go through the whole book, replacing the word it with the concrete object. Acting it out allows you, as the teacher and the parent and the child, to work out maybe it is really important.
Mm. And
And
you,
there's a huge number of books that have this sort of scenario in them where we assume that children read a word, therefore they comprehend the text.
yeah.
And the other one is Rod Campbell's Dear Zoo. He comes up on every single page. The word he has different meaning on every page.
Mm.
And I actually wrote an academic paper with Professor Tim Brzezinski on this pronoun resolution. And it goes back to teachers accepting that when children read a word, they therefore comprehend it. Whereas language is dynamic, and we tend not to teach language is dynamic. We tend to teach read the word, comprehend it.
Yeah. Do you find then that over a period of time, then it becomes clear to them, so they don't have to do this their entire life, cross out the it, right? But it's a process. Is that?
You're absolutely right. It is a process. What happens with language, though, is the distance between the pronoun it and what we call the antecedent, the word that it refers to, gets further and further apart as language becomes more complex. And my son Nicholas, with his PhD today, will still say that word it can confuse me.
Mm, okay. But
So
he knows
it,
what to
it
do now.
sorry,
But he knows what to do now to help
he
himself if
knows
it
what to
does.
do now.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
yes.
I like that.
But it's knowing what to do that is the critical component. And that's why I act it out. The other component is I read a very simple poem to my student about a cat in a hat on a mat with a rat and a bat. And then it goes, well, fancy that. That is just not possible. There might be one scratch cat, no rat or bat, and one messy bat. When I read this to my students or show them this, they sit and they look at me totally confused because they can read all the words. But what do you know? There's a lot of things going on in this very simple poem.
Yeah.
And the first is I get them to act it out. I say, you be the cat, then you be the rat, and you be the bat. What's happening? What's going on the floor first? So we've got a mat, and then we've got a hat, and then we've got these three animals in it. The moment my students act it out, they are no longer confused. They are, now I know what to do, because inference happens instantly
Okay.
in language.
Amazing. Amazing. And Anna had written in earlier and said, when we did the hyperlexic definition, and said, I wonder if my son has this. He can spell words that he sees randomly. He spells Disney, Junior, cat, hat, hen, but he's nonverbal. And she was asking, where do you go? Who do you go to for help with this? Who do you go to get the diagnosis of dyslexia or hyperlexia? And who can help you? And I was saying, I think it's different for everyone, because I would want it to be that there's somebody at the school that can be helpful, but I think that isn't always the case.
I would come to me.
And so do you take
What?
people virtually?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. When students are younger, I like the parent to sit there with them. But other than that, yes, I certainly do teach students virtually.
Okay.
What I want in a reading teacher is someone who is willing to try, someone who is willing to look at my child and say, what do I have to do to teach this child to read?
Yeah.
I don't want a standardized reading program.
Yeah.
I did not trust a tutor to deal with my son when he was 6 and 7 because he was terrified of meeting someone new for starters, and he would have probably shut down, and we would have had to have done tutoring after school, and that would just not have worked. So I felt privileged to take him on myself. And the one thing I've learned to do is adapt and change and personalize the learning. Because when learning is personalized, the children go, ah, yes, this is okay. I can do it. When it's standardized, you ended up with standardized sentences like I saw a cat. Forget it. The child or the children don't always get it. But I would agree with you. Finding a tutor is expensive. There are no guarantees. But if you want someone who is willing to change it and willing to work with your child to say, I'm willing to try and do X, Y, and Z to make sure your child learns to read and write effectively.
And I really see in the book that this has turned into a passion for you. That this, I talk a lot about, because I'm a former teacher, and I think that one of the greatest, most inspirational things in the moment is when you see the light bulb click on in someone, when you teach them something and they go, and they see the possibility and you see the possibility. And I felt like reading your book that is a very big deal to you, that when you see that light bulb come on, that's very reinforcing for you as a teacher. Amazing. So tell us, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the book. It's available now. We've got it right there behind you, and we've got a picture of it as well. And where can people get it, Lois?
It's easiest to get it on Amazon.
Okay. And
there's an audio version that I have read. Sorry.
oh, you're so good. I'm so glad that you did that. What a great thing. Okay, and then if people want to know more about you, I know you have a website, yes, or a Facebook?
Yes.
I can't get my computer to respond. Tell them where to go.
Yes. Website is www.loisletchford.com. You find me on LinkedIn, Facebook. I've dropped a bit off with, but I'm still there. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Okay.
It's all Lois Letchford.
And if somebody has watched this and they're like, okay, I want to have a consultation with her, potentially have her be a virtual tutor for my child or me, how would they best reach out to you? On your website?
Yes, on my website or through Gmail or lois@loisletchford.com. I give one free tutoring session to see if the child likes me and see if we get on. And that's just a connecting experience to say, does this look like something that we can work together on?
Amazing. So here's my big question for you, Lois. When are you going to write the manual to learn how to do what you do?
I love the question. You know, my problem is I am dyslexic, and what people haven't, I don't think, realized is for me to write that book was a huge effort, and I needed someone to help me edit the book to get it to the level that it needed to be. And to do that, it cost me a lot of money.
Okay. Well, hopefully you'll make enough money back on this book that you'll want to invest it in the next one. Because I think that's the thing that people are going to clamor for is, where's the manual?
I will work on it then.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a former teacher, and so I really respected, when you made the decision to sit down with a lump of clay and you were going to do experientially the letters of the alphabet. Now, I'm a potter. I play in clay, and clay is very reinforcing to me. And the idea of sitting with a child and shaping the letters, I don't have the patience. I'm just going to say. But I think it's so inventive, and I think it's brilliant how you took that and you detail how you went from the clay to other things to eventually having him be able to spell his words orally. It's amazing. But what I hear from a lot of people, Lois, is that people go, I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to teach. And they don't have that sort of mindset of creative. Listen, I know some teachers who don't even have that, but
Yeah.
right? But a lot of good teachers, they're so creative, and clearly you're creative. So I think, a step by step for a bunch of people out there who aren't teachers, I think both teachers and parents would really appreciate it. Are you making
Step
notes?
by step.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I
And
like it.
maybe collaborate with someone so they do all the writing and you just explain it to them experientially and they put it into, I don't know.
Easier words.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I will say too that you're also a very brilliant writer. It's very the experience of the book. It's a beautifully written book, Lois. Um,
I can say thank you so much because it's interesting how much work was involved and how much reading that, over the past 20 years I've done that helped me write that book.
well, it's amazing. Anna says, thank you so much for this information. It's giving me ideas where to start with my son and my daughter as well. It makes so much sense how you explain it, connecting reading and comprehension. And they said, thank you, Shannon, for bringing wonderful people. I try. Uh, so I'm going to ask you this. Is it okay to ask you questions about when your sons got their diagnoses, or is that too private?
No, that you can ask, certainly. Nicholas certainly got his diagnosis, by the end of first grade when he failed grade 1.
Mm-hmm.
And that was totally disastrous. And what it taught me is that when children get these diagnoses, how it really just condemns them to a basket. The diagnosis didn't do what I needed it to do.
Yeah. Well, I think that
Does
resonates
the
with a
book
lot of
talk
us.
about? I'm reading a question. Does the book talk about teens as well as young children? In
Yes.
fact, yes, it does. Because I went to Lubbock, Texas, and I taught children age 13 who were non-reading, and another boy, 2 boys who were 16 are non-reading. And what I did to teach them to read,
Yeah.
particularly the early stages of what I did to teach them to read.
Which is very fascinating. That's towards the end of the book. And I think that's worth a
Yeah,
read for you guys as well, because I think we really get to see your soul as a teacher, because the amount of patience and waiting and this decision of not trying to put something on them, but to create an opportunity in which this first young man says to you, can you come back tomorrow? Like he wants you to come back. And and you say, would you like me to? And I'm paraphrasing again, but he says, well, if all the lessons are like this one, yes, right? Because so many experts have said to us, it's one thing if you know how to do something, but getting somebody to want to do it is an entirely different aspect of teaching that should not be overlooked.
yeah,
And that's where I was like, she's got the soul of a teacher, because you were
yeah,
selfless, and not selfish in the moment.
yes, yeah,
It wasn't about you going to be the best teacher ever. It was about, or about you teaching him something. It was about you meeting him where he was. I was very impressed with
yeah.
that, Lois.
I often feel when I'm working with students that that we're in this basket together, and that I'm not imposing any ideas, but it's a discussion. It's a revelation of what do you know, what do I know? How do we work together to make sure you and I have the same sort of comprehension and understanding of the scenario that we're talking about?
Yeah. I know everybody who's listening who has someone that they love who has struggled with any kind of learning issue longs for a teacher in their children's life like you. Because it is,
Yeah,
when you have a teacher like Lois, it makes all the difference, because
yeah,
the child feels accepted and they begin to learn, and that self-confidence comes, instead of somebody who lays back in the chair and says, oh, he's just impossible. The lack of professionalism of people who would describe a child that way just makes me want to kick people with a pointed shoe, Lois.
I totally agree. Totally
I don't know how
agree.
you got through that.
Well, that it's fascinating. You needed it for a book, didn't I?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I also love it's funny to me that in the beginning of the book, it starts out with you waiting to hear back from Nicholas because he's defending his dissertation at Oxford. And you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And ultimately, when he calls you, he says, okay, I'm giving things away, but you need to read the book, you guys. But he says, okay, and he says, Mom, now you can write your book, because it feels like that's going to be the perfect ending to the book. But I also, in the back, you thank your oldest son for, in fact, giving you the end of your book.
Yeah.
That he says to you, you can't end the book here. You have to talk about what you do with your students. I think your oldest son is right. So there we go.
And I clashed with my oldest son for a long period of time, because he'd always learned so easily and he put in no effort. So, and now he's phenomenal. How I wish I had loved him more and embraced him more and accepted him as he was. But saying that, when children struggle like my younger two did, the brain space you have is very limited.
Yeah.
That Nicholas really took over my life.
Well, and I want to ask you about that, because I only have the one child. And so he took all of my focus. And we actually, right at the time when he was being diagnosed, we were considering having a second. We were way too old to be considering that. But we ultimately decided when he was diagnosed that we were going to be a one-child family, and that was what it was going to be. Because I don't know how people balance it. And when you talk about the amount of time that you were spending teaching Nicholas, I found myself going, how is she managing, running a house, having an older child and having a younger child? And I don't know how you did that. Do you have any wise words for us?
You certainly need support. And we were in the UK when I was dealing with Nicholas, and that we had grandparents living with us. And that was a huge bonus for us, having them around. You certainly need more support than is available in a nuclear family.
There we go. We have one more question here. How can I help a teen who has good reading and comprehension, but very bad at executive functioning? Is it, in fact, a lack of comprehension or something else? I have some things to say about that, but what would you like to say, Lois?
That's a really difficult question for me. Executive functioning, I would get some more help and get some more support to deal with those sort of components of life skills.
Yeah.
This is not just a problem the child has now, but they need some help for life. And we often, as parents, don't have the skills we need to help our children go through these things. So I would reach out to more people who know about executive functioning and work through some strategies as a parent and a child to help your son or daughter achieve what they needed to.
And I used to teach junior high and high school before I taught college. And I will tell you that I don't think that there is a teen on the planet that doesn't have executive function issues. And I think too often it's a crying shame that more teachers don't teach executive functions, and more schools are going in this direction, where in 7th grade they really start focusing on teaching executive functions to teach them how to be successful in high school and how to be successful in college and beyond. And there are some great books out there about teaching executive function skills to teens on the spectrum. My favorite is from Dr. Adele Nadowski, who used to be a regular on our show, because I find that for our kids who tend to really thrive on structure, that they like understanding something, knowing where something goes, when do I have to have it, that if you give them the skills of executive functions, which are all about structure, they thrive. And their anxiety levels go down as a result of teaching them executive function skills, because they start to know where exactly their homework is, when exactly it's due for what class, what folder it's in, and what the process is of keeping it in that folder. It becomes very quickly self-reinforcing to them once they're taught how to do it. And Dr. Adele Nadowski has been very successful working with teenagers on this, and she's got a book out about it. I wish I remembered what the title of it is, but Adele Nadowski.
Google it.
Yes, Google it. It's N-A, there's a D and a J in the Nadowski, so I'll tell you that much. And you'll find, if you look for her on our playlist, we have a bunch of videos with her talking about executive functions, and then you can go read the book that she decided to write after telling us about it all for so long. Anyway, Lois, we're out of time, and yet I feel like I've met an old friend.
I do too.
There we go.
Just been wonderful to talk with you and share my experience, and just believe in your child, believe they are capable of doing anything.
Absolutely. The name of her memoir is Reversed, and you'll see that some of the letters are reversed. I think this is a great book for anyone who is struggling, there it is right there, anyone who's struggling with reading or reading comprehension, or if you're a parent who just feels like you've come to a dead end, I think you'll be inspired by her story and how she did not give up. So Lois, thank you so much for being with us. You take care.
Thank you so much.
If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook.